Brad, I really enjoyed your presentation this morning with David Grossman. It was pictured as the great social media debate, and yet it really wasn't that far apart when you start talking about the thoughts of the social media.
It was fun to be able to work with David and meet with a group of IABC folk to talk about how social media is having an impact inside the workforce, because most of us are living with the Facebooks and the LinkedIns and the Twitter in our private lives, but they are working their way into the workplace. There is a sort of a consumerization of IT and technology that's taking place in most of our workforces and workplaces. And I think as communications people, we need to figure out the proper mix. Where does it fit in? What do we do instead of what we've done before, and how does this supplement our communication efforts?
You work for Cisco, and so obviously you have great technology and the desire to really have other companies do it. Was it pretty rewarding to you to hear a couple of other companies, people from larger companies like Boeing,
Northern Trust, to be able to hear that, because we do become sort of spoiled by having all these tools and technologies at our disposal at Cisco. There's always someone coming out, would you like to be part of a beta test? We're testing this. Sometimes the difficulty in having that richness of toys is picking out which one's going to be the winner. Or you start to put resources behind something only to have the plug pulled and moved to something else. But we're just doing in fast time what I think everybody else experiences as communications folk in real life. You know, just as I get used to that word processing package, we moved to this. Just as we found out this was the email system that was the standard, we switched to that. We needed a new portal program to be able to run our intranet. So there's always this march of technology that we have to get used to. We just have to face it a lot. And I think it was valuable to be able to hear how some people were implementing these things. And I guess the best learning that I came away with was this idea of beginning to look at different audiences, even internal audiences, as discrete, dividing it up and sub-segmenting and targeting, because social media is not a one-size-fits-all cure-all for a communication role. It really gets back to what's the business problem you're trying to solve, how is this communications tool the best way to be able to get there?
know your audience. Some of the people work in manufacturing, and so it's very typical when you think, oh, these are people that don't have access to computers, and you think, okay, that's the only dividing line. But there's really divisions along interests and work roles and many other things, and social media can help you to differentiate your messages that way.
Yeah, I think we also had a very healthy discussion around sort of the two levels of communications, because oftentimes as communications people, we're charged with some of that higher level, do the strategy and all the sort of messages that support what it is that the organization is trying to do. And we often sort of forego the challenge of communicating at that tactical level, what's going on in the workplace, in that immediate work group, and how can we make sure the communications environment is sort of enabled for them to be able to get their jobs done more efficiently. They have the information they need to do their jobs, and we sort of, well, that's the manager's job or that's somebody else's job. I think what we're seeing with social media and some of these new tools is that those roles can come a little bit more closely blended together, that people are able to make that connection between here's what the organization's trying to accomplish and here's my job and how it supports that. And I'm just delighted to see tools and technology put in the hands of bright people, because they're the ones who will figure out how to use it. It doesn't have to be me to do it.
Yes, and when we talk about face-to-face, which David said, he just wants to keep that face-to-face, technology can actually do that and help us be face-to-face even though we're miles away.
I'm blessed with living in an environment where we have everything from WebEx meetings, which allow you to see in a very small window on your PC screen the people who are in the meeting with you, to telepresence, which is probably the high end in video conferencing, HD screens where when you walk into the room, someone is projected life-size, and you would swear that you're in the same room with them, even though they can be miles away, thousands of miles, the other side of the globe. The downside that nobody tells you about with telepresence and some of these tools is that your workday hours change radically, because you're not just talking to the person in the next cubicle or the next building. You could be talking to somebody who's time zones away from you. So I find often my mornings start very early on the West Coast with meetings with European colleagues and a certain flurry during the regular part of the day with some people, but then it picks up again in the evening. So you just need to do a time shift with your resources and your own energy.
So we may have to see more flexibility for employees and for employers to allow people to have some sort of a balance between those types of demands.
I think that's the real challenge, is because, I mean, we've known this in communications for a long time. You're not necessarily creative between the hours of 8 and 5, sitting in a certain chair in a certain office. And I think these new tools and technologies, whether you're talking about a handheld device or a big meeting room that can connect you halfway around the globe, you're going to need to figure out that time management piece and figure out how to schedule your workflow in a different way. I think the other part is we need to convince our bosses that it's okay to work remotely, and that for many jobs, especially in the knowledge part of things, that you don't have to be at a certain place to be able to be productive.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of bosses, you had a great presentation here at Maggiano's where you talked about what do CEOs who really know how to communicate, what do they focus on? What's one or two of the things that you shared that maybe you could share here in this brief time?
I think one of the key ones that's so difficult for them to do is to listen before they speak. Because so many times employees want to hear the word from the top. They don't have that much time with a busy executive, so tell me everything. As soon as a CEO starts to share an idea, it becomes very difficult for that person to do what I think they really need to do, which is listen to employees and different ideas. It's because as soon as they speak, it's sort of like it'll cut off any differing opinions on a particular topic. So we need to train our CEOs to do that. I think the other piece that goes somewhat closely coupled with that is to be able to act and speak in a consistent way. Sort of a say-do alignment, as Jim Shaper, one of my good friends, talks about. But actions speak louder than words. We've always been in charge of the words part of it. We need to find a way to marry it with the actions and also point out to executives when there is an asynchronous message being sent out. Provide coaching, counseling, figure out a way to make sure that they're at their most effective when their words and their actions line up.
Because these messages, they surface. It's not like the old days where you could say something in one part of the country knowing that it's never going to get to the other part of the country. Here, it's almost real time that it's everywhere.
Yeah, we have had people who have been in internal meetings in all sorts of organizations who are tweeting as the meeting is going on and sharing things with colleagues, sometimes even beyond the firewall with what's going on. And it's instantaneous. It can be around the world, and the camera is always on. People are going to have to get used to the fact that the video presence is going to be there, and we'll have things soon like video voicemails, where instead of just picking up the phone and listening to someone speak, we'll have a chance to see them deliver a message. We're going to have to get used to looking down the lens of the camera and delivering our message directly to someone.
Brave new world, and one of the things that we tested here at IABC-Chicago today was to use WebEx to send your presentation through other chapters throughout the country. Do you see that as maybe some direction for IABC chapters to consider doing, allowing, maybe if they're fortunate like Chicago, can bring someone like yourself to this location and then send it via WebEx to other chapters that don't have that sort of availability?
I think long-distance learning, webinars, whatever you want to call it, whether it's the WebEx brand that has to be part of Cisco, or I'm generous enough to say any flavor, is a good way to be able to sort of take advantage of time. Again, sometimes people don't have the time to get to a meeting because they've got book solid, but they can carve out an hour and sit at their own machine and watch and learn. So I think it's a great way to reach. I think it's also for an IABC chapter that may be more remote, or maybe a smaller one that doesn't have the resources that a chapter like Chicago has, to be able to connect to that sort of bigger organization with a few more resources and tap the value, because it really is all about the network, and we are in IABC sort of all in this together. I also think that it's the best way for us to be able to break down some barriers to connect to colleagues perhaps on the other side of the world, that down under part of things in Australia and New Zealand, in a way where we can share some best practices, because I've had a chance to go to some of those chapters when I was chairman, and some amazing work being done there that's invisible to us, whether it's Chicago or the Bay Area. And we need to see the best that they've got, and vice versa.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you, and also thank you for bringing some of that California weather to Chicago today, and I know we both want to get out there and enjoy it a little bit, so I appreciate you taking the time to talk.
It's a pleasure, and thanks for inviting me. Look forward to coming back, either live or via web.
Wonderful.